Puyo Puyo Tetris 2 is the sequel to the Puyo Puyo Tetris spin-off. It might be mainline, I'm not really well versed on the Puyo Puyo universe, but does that really matter? I don't think so. Regardless though, I will hopefully be making this a shorter review focusing more on the changes made to this game for better and for worse, as I already reviewed the first game and even explained how the game of Tetris worked, making it hopefully a very accessible review. So once again, in this one we'll try to keep it simple. Starting then with the story, following the same characters from the first game, we have here more of the same. I mean, it's not bad, but it's still very much a kid's story for kids, and there's not much here for the adults playing. Which I get, most adults playing this probably don't even care for the story. I'll be honest, I didn't care either. It's really just a lot of pretend stakes and kids talking to each other, as mostly flavor text. You know, you're not missing out when you just press the skip button, like I think most people will. I would say a way that this game does handle the story better actually ends up relating more to the gameplay, but we'll talk about it here anyways. And this is the way it's presented. In the original it was very basic and straightforward linear levels, while here there's a more open nature to it with the level selection area, kinda like a Super Mario game, where you can take on optional levels and paths while still having that linear path in there if you want it. But in doing this, I believe it's also where the worst part of this game was born. As we now move to talk about the gameplay, where the first thing I have to say is they made it grindy. And I was just like, how do you even do this? And the way it works is, in this I believe new mode where you can make a team with different characters, and each character has an ability that you can use during a match. This will be a versus match, as in fighting another player or NPC, and it kinda works like an RPG where each move will take a certain amount of mana and the goal is to deploy the enemy's health. And in this mode you don't actually lose if you reach the top of the board like you would in Puyo Puyo or Tetris. Instead you lose a chunk of your life and part of your board is erased so you can keep playing. And while this is an interesting change of pace, I personally never got used to it. I would mostly either just win by playing regularly or I would just lose. The thing is, in my experience, I didn't really have to worry about my level until the very final boss fight. A fight that made me realize how woefully underleveled I was. Which is a weird thing to say for an arcadey puzzle game, and this was due in part to the difficulty of the game, which is another major thing I want to talk about. Here we have two different modes: adaptive difficulty, on or off, which means you either play in a mode that adapts to how you play, or you just play with the base difficulty, which I would say is too easy for most of the game. And why? Obviously there's already multiple difficulties implemented in the game for the adaptive mode, but it just doesn't let you pick from them. And I think that sucks, because what happened to me was I played most of this game in the adaptive difficulty mode, where the game at first will be fairly easy, as I believe it's trying to assess your skills, and then in my experience it just jumps to an astronomically hard difficulty. And for reference, I'm only okay at Tetris. I would say I can play fairly well, but also you're not gonna catch me doing a lot of T-spins and some of the higher level plays of Tetris. And Puyo Puyo, well, I'm just not that very good at it. Even while playing these two games where I think my skills have improved, it is simply just not a game I'm very good at, and I find it hard to wrap my head around it. So why did the game jump to such a hard difficulty? And it's hard to put into perspective without playing yourself, but I'm talking about a difficulty where if you don't stop them, they will literally end you in the first 20 seconds. As in, most matches will revolve around filling your opponent's board for them to lose like a regular game, of course working different for those special matches. But going back to the difficulty then, I found myself in this situation where I either play as the regular difficulty, which felt too easy, or I play with the adaptive one that eventually becomes too hard to keep playing. And so what ended up happening was I had to turn off that adaptive difficulty, making the game easy, and then bringing it back to the earlier topic, making me reach the final boss very underleveled, because, well, the game was just easy and I didn't feel the need to grind. But to be honest, I just don't get it because I also didn't feel the need to grind in the adaptive difficulty mode, as it was just impossibly hard even in the non-RPG like battles, like I already said. So what is happening is you reach the final level, and no matter how easy the game is, if you are so underleveled that the opponent can easily one hit you or two hit you, it doesn't really matter how easy it is. And that's kind of what happened to the final boss fight here. And to be fair to the game, I did feel the base difficulty was fine for Puyo Puyo, which I'm not good at, so maybe if you're not good at Tetris, then that base difficulty would also feel fair. But that does not justify not having a more in-depth difficulty options, especially when the game obviously has them under the hood. And it seems it's only hiding it for the sake of this adaptive setting, which does not work very well in my experience. Now, to move on from this and just lightly mention everything else, of course this is Puyo Puyo Tetris, and so the campaign will revolve around playing those games, and the game has a mix of both, which also works exactly as it did in the previous game. In fact, besides this more RPG mode I talked about, this is borderline the same for both single player and multiplayer modes, to the point where it's borderline the same game. Yeah, the story and levels are presented in a more interesting way, but the game is still the same, and this new mode, which while different, is also nothing special and doesn't really justify a whole new game. If you play the first Puyo Puyo Tetris, it's very hard to justify this game as it's more of the same, and maybe that's what you want, but in that case, why not just play the game you already have? It's exactly the same thing, I'm telling you. Even as we now get into the graphics, once again, the overworld and the presentation outside of the gameplay is a lot better with that flashy, bright, colorful, jovial look, livening up the menus the way it did the gameplay in the first game. But that's the thing, it's the same graphically within the actual gameplay. People usually complain about sports games or games like Call of Duty being the same every year, but this is borderline shameless. And it's a shame because the first Puyo Puyo Tetris was a good but simple game, and it really could have used a sequel with some new and creative ideas, but this isn't it. To finish this off well, we'll talk about the soundtrack, which, you guessed it, it's very similar to the original one. And in that case, it's fine, it's neither good or bad. I said the original was really good, taking the classic sound and turning it into this more poppy sound that fits the aesthetic of the game, and this one does that as well, and it's a pleasant soundtrack. This is the most positive thing I said and will say about this game, as I have to say overall, this feels cheap. I feel cheated in a way. I feel like somehow I got it wrong and I bought the same game twice. I feel like this is what Puyo Puyo Tetris could have looked like after a year of updates if it was a different type of game. It really just doesn't feel like a new game at all. I think that this game simply just does not justify its existence, and it's annoying. I wanna like it, but I can't. If I had played this game first, I wouldn't even have this sour taste, but I did, and a lot of people who are fans of the original will also have, or maybe they don't care, but I do, and for that I'm giving Puyo Puyo Tetris 2 a 5 out of 10. It's a good game, but it's a game I already played with a different name, and what was added here is either not a big deal to the overall game or I simply didn't like it, like grinding. Recommendations wise, don't play it if you played the original, and if you haven't played the original and you want to play one of them, then go for whatever one is cheaper. That would be my advice. Sorry if this review was a lot more opinionated and went less in the way of a traditional review, which is also opinionated, that's not my point. But I don't know, I just been feeling a bit burned out on the more straightforward reviews, and I think of maybe trying to make these shorter and more opinionated focused reviews rather than explaining the very basics of every game I play. I've been doing this for over 100 reviews at this point, so I think it's okay to try something new regardless. I hope that you enjoyed watching, And if so, please consider subscribing, liking, even commenting, all the things you can do for free here on YouTube. And regardless of that, I hope you're having a good day and goodbye.